There's a code of silence that we don't dare speak. There's a wall between us and a river so deep. We keep pretending that there's nothing wrong. There's a code of silence and it can't go on.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt. This is Cutting Through the Matrix on August the 22nd, 2013. For newcomers to the broadcast, please make good use of the website cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Lots and lots of info there where you can download lots of audios for free. I go through the system we're born into and how it works, who set it up, and where it's supposed to go, because the future is always planned by those in power. In the present, basically. And those in the present got their power from their daddies and mummies beforehand. And very, very old families have accumulated incredible wealth through centuries and centuries of managing the money system of the planet, basically. And they're going towards standardization across the whole world right now for the global society. Always been their dream. Most folk want to just conquer by using militaries, but it's much easier to use other folks' militaries, of course, and also use the money system on top of it, because everything revolves on, in this system anyway, revolves around money, including your governments. Your governments are dependent on the big bankers, to the private bankers, to lend money all the time. That's why bankers love welfare systems and the social system to the socialist system, because they're guaranteed continuing interest, massive interest and compound interest forever and ever, and putting generations still to come of children into paying off debts accumulated over a long, long time by their predecessors. So this is a system, again, the big bankers wanted to bring in, and they've got what they want today. They call it the globalist system. And this is the century of change. In their own words, in fact, these guys who created the big tax-free or tax-exempt foundations under the guise of philanthropy, they're worth trillions of dollars. They fund armies of non-governmental organizations. They have the biggest think tanks across the world, which advise governments on all policies for all aspects of society. These characters run the world. And of course, they even put their own guys in as prime ministers and presidents. In fact, it doesn't matter what side you think that they're on. They're all on the same side, because they're all from the same foundations, basically. And they've sworn allegiance to this big agenda too. So we're living through an ongoing, massive, planned change in society. The century of change, as I say, is what academia referred to this century in the 20th century. And what they meant was all the old inequalities to be stamped out, etc., and this new totally socialist system brought in with government agencies running to make sure everything worked the way it was supposed to work. In other words, the way that the masters want it to be, to serve them best. And we're already here. We're swamped, for goodness sake, with the government agencies in all countries. In fact, if you look at all countries, it doesn't matter if the US, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, it's all the same system. And it was intended to be the same system because the boys that brought in the private organizations that run the world and set up the foundations, starting at the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations, they wrote about it. At least their own historians wrote about the whole agenda in his own books, basically. And he was a professor, and he worked with the State Department in the US and many other departments in the US government. And he knew his stuff. He knew the whole agenda. And he thought it was time that the public should know about it too, because he said this organization has been behind all the wars that you've heard of over the last 100 years. He said they've drastically not just altered history, but directed history. And he says the public will accept it. He thought the public would accept it. And actually, I think he's probably quite right. Even though he's dead now, but the public probably will accept anything, because with the right indoctrination, ongoing indoctrination, sometimes couched under the terms of lifelong learning through the media, entertainment, and wherever you read as non-fiction, you're being programmed into accepting this whole system as being inevitable. Because the big trick, remember, has always been to say that things are just so complicated now, we need a huge, massive government. And that's the big trick, to get you to give up all your rights and freedoms, etc. And for the future children too, who may be born into this world, to be brought into under a complete government-dominated system. That's where we are today. It's planned that way, folks. Remember, too, I go into this at say, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You can also print up many of the talks I've given for, if you want to, in English, on all the sites listed at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And you can go into Alan Watts Sentinel.eu and get transcripts in other languages. You can also help me take along by buying the books and discs there. And you'll see how to do it on the website. Remember, from the US to Canada, you can still use personal checks or international postal money orders. From the post office, you can send cash or use PayPal. And straight donations are seriously welcome as we go through the planned inflation, because the masters of the world want you to pay an awful lot more for the basic necessities of life: food, energy, clothing, rent, mortgages, all that kind of stuff. That's all part of this big Millennium Project or Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century. All part of it, folks. And the big boys lose nothing, of course, by giving you less, since they up the prices about 4 or 5 times of what they've already been charging you for the same things. So we're going through a planned society. There's winners and losers actually in it, of course. I've mentioned Jack Satali's book quite a few times. He was called Winners and Losers in the Coming New World Order, also called Millennium. And he should know, since he works at the United Nations, and he has been basically the top man in France for a whole bunch of presidents, in fact. Remember that presidents and prime ministers, even presidents, are really frontmen, and the guys behind them are far, far more important. The guys who make all the decisions, who've been lifers in politics, etc., on higher levels, they know the score, what's happening, and their job is to make sure that the front man takes the heat for it. And that's why you vote them out eventually, and you vote in the next bunch to find that the same agenda continues. It's interesting that Jefferson in the US mentioned that in his day. He said that when you see the same agenda going on through changes in the House of Congress, meaning parties, then you know you're under tyranny. And that's what we are, folks. Most folk haven't a clue how it really works at all. I've often mentioned the Freemason Albert Pike, who certainly knew the agenda, and there's much more to that guy than I've mentioned on the air. But Albert Pike, who was the sort of Pope of Freemasonry in his day, as they call him, he said that those who won't use their own intellect, your own reasoning power, those who won't use it. This is how the Freemasons see the rest of society. And they got it from another group that had been fighting Christianity, actually, at that time, for a long, long time, centuries, in fact. And he said that those who won't use their intellect and reasoning are therefore stake on the table and beasts of burden by choice and consent. You see, it's not up to me or anybody else to tell you what to do or think or anything else. It's up to yourself to come to your own conclusions. Stop looking for other people to give you your conclusions. You have to do that if you want to save anything at all, including yourself. And remember, too, that Brzezinski, in his own book called Between Two Ages, he mentioned the same thing, too. And he's a geopolitician, been behind many, many wars, including the present ones going on, along with Kissinger. But Brzezinski said in his book, he said that back in the 70s, he says the general public had been trained not to think for themselves. And when he was writing that too, there was a transition happening in the media, because everyone knew previously to that all media, you regarded with suspicion, because media moguls or magnates were powerful people with their own agendas. They belonged to the same organizations that run the world, still do. But they've trained the public since, so that somehow the media has changed, and it's out there to do your thinking for you. That's what he said, basically. And he says not only that, the public expect them to do their reasoning for them now. That ties right in with what Albert Pike said. A beast of burden by choice and consent. And that's how the big boys see you. So that's why Jack Satali could also write his book, Winners and Losers in the Coming New World Order. The winners at the top right now are the greediest people on the planet. They believe in a future for themselves, and we'll be left behind like booster rockets, basically. We've done our job through evolution for them to go off into the future, high technology and so on. Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix and talking about thinking for yourself basically. Most folk get, as I say, the media, the news for the day, and they have reactions to it. It's meant to get reactions from you, emotive reactions, not logical reactions, just emotional reactions, you see. Because you don't question its validity or anything else, you just accept what you're told and that's that. And the way it's often expressed is you want to swing one way or another on a particular topic and lead you to the conclusion that you're going to even argue with others about once you think you've reached it for yourself. But remember, those at the top too are masters, at least the big boys that they hire. And they really have big boys at the top. They hire big corporations to do all their propaganda for them. And I've gone through propaganda quite a few times on some of the history of it too. And propaganda is endless. It's an ancient technique of spinning things and so on. And the big boys themselves can always hire the experts to do it for them. And they get a lot of free advertising and publicity all the time. Now remember too, those who want something to come in, it's like the computer, etc., and cell phones and all that kind of thing, to get them all in a big massive market are always behind the front men they put out there for you to believe are geniuses. This is an old technique, even with Einstein, to put him out there. And people follow it and believe it and so on. And the more it's hyped up by movies and all the rest of it, the more it embeds in your minds that it must be all true. This character's a genius. But again, they would have front people rather than say that big corporations run the world. They've got to have front people, basically, and make you think that everything is competition, which is nonsense, utter nonsense. We have wars to eliminate competition, literally. I mean, full-scale wars. Wars can also be economic. And economic warfare is always going on, even between corporations, unless they belong to the same clubs. And the same clubs have a different judicial system above them that keeps them all in line working together. That's a very old idea, by the way, from a very old people. But here's a good example of how an ad is put out here. And people forget things, you see, and they don't remember. It says online access is a human right. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg says. Now, most people are going to jump and say, oh, that's true, that's great, that is true. I hope he's going to do something about it and help folk get internet access across the whole planet. But stop and think about it. Look at all the revelations we've had recently about total surveillance society. They can't do it without the computer and the cell phone. Everyone has been targeted constantly on a daily basis. All your information is going up there, vocal or written or whatever. It's all going up there for the big boys to see, stored by the Pentagon, by NSA and a whole bunch of other international organizations. So that they can basically build a personality profile on you and have it ongoing through your whole life long. And they can work out you, the real you, better than you can, you see. We always have a persona we think we project to others. Now they see it differently, that other people see it differently from the one that you think you project to them. And therefore people are really ignorant of the fact that they have you done perfectly. They even have you, an artificial you, a composite of you basically, with all your data in it and personality and all the rest of it. And they do war games on it in the Pentagon. I've read the articles here on the air from the Pentagon's own site. So really, it's a great right to have the internet and all the rest of it. Believe you me, if it wasn't to suit the big boys and your masters for the next phase of total dominance, you would never have got the computer at all, because they need that. That's one of their biggest weapons on the public. But anyway, again, go back to the headline again. Online access is a human right. See, in other words, you put out the moral high ground, and the schmucks follow behind you. Yeah, that's true, yeah, you see. Mark Zuckerberg says. And it says, Facebook connects 1.15 billion people throughout its social network, and now it wants to get to the next 5 billion. The enormous social network wants to help again, social. See, this is written by propagandists. And it says, wants to help the world's 7 billion people online through a partnership with Samsung, Nokia, and other large mobile technology companies, the company said Wednesday. Now remember, too, that all the top companies in the world are all funded by governments. That's how they get their start. The CIA has legitimate, huge companies out there. Massive ones. So does Britain's MI6. And every country's the same as well. Now it's global, so they're all in it together, you see. So corporations are putting this out here and getting a front man to take the credit for it. This wonderful, clever fellow, Mark Zuckerberg. Remember what Zuckerberg said once the folk realized about a year or two ago that he was selling all your data to all the corporations. He said the people who are complaining are stupid. And he used the F word. This is the wonderful guy who wants to help the world. In other words, and he's right enough. Do you really think anything is free out there? And Zuckerberg was making a fortune off all the idiots that blindly sign up and put all their data up there. They sell it to the NSA, they sell it to all the organizations. And here he is again, as a humanitarian, coming out again to push another commercial project for himself and others. Think for yourselves, folks. Don't be caught up with online access as a human right for the moral high ground, as I say, or wants to help people, right? Remember that Carl Quigley, who was a historian for the CFR and Royal Institute for International Affairs, he said that philanthropists would eventually merge with governments, and actually it happened already. And because, as I say, the philanthropists, the big foundations own the think tanks. They own them, folks, that advise governments' policies on every aspect of social policies and foreign policies as well. And I've read articles on here again. If you go into the archive section at cuttingthroughthematrix.com from the CFR, talking about the same thing. And that's, it was about 2 or 3 years ago, they came out with a huge project to try and make this a new normal, basically. They're always getting new normals, you see, where these unelected philanthropists would have more say in running the world's affairs. See, that's already here now, since big corporations like IBM somehow get the go-ahead, or give themselves the go-ahead, or government just accepts what they're told to accept, and they're creating a smart grid across the whole planet, with all the other biggies working with them. And you still prattle on about democracy and having rights and so on. So anyway, think for yourselves. Remember all these things I discuss, all the topics I put up at the end of the night on cuttingthroughthematrix.com for those to save them, hopefully save them for the future, because things disappear down the memory hole. Now, I've also mentioned the Trans-Pacific Partnership too. Part of the big CFR organization and Royal Institute for International Affairs on the English side was to create a new world order. And it was eventually way back actually, the days of John Dee and Francis Bacon, who talked about creating a British Empire, or a British Empire they called it. And of course this took off and held steady for quite a few centuries as the empire grew, because the boys with the money flooded into Britain from Holland and had a pact with royalty and so on. And then they decided after World War I they were going to hand the torch to America to take over all the taxation of the public. So they had to get the Federal Reserve and the Income Tax Act passed and all the rest of it, because Britain already had it. And tax the public for the wars as the US took over to create this global order. An world empire, basically. Lots of information on that too. But Quigley does go through that, Professor Quigley, in his own books, which you got to get to understand it. And then you understand that the world's always been run by quiet but very powerful open societies, open to the public, for knowledge that is. They're listed, folks. Back with more after this.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix and talking about the big boys with their world plans and agenda. But remember, they united the whole of Europe under this massive parliament that no one wants, except the big boys that designed it, of course. And these private organizations set up the amalgamation of the whole of Europe under the guise, under the con of a free trade agreement. And so free trade agreements are part of the bringing together of countries, and all the laws merged together. It's all done for them, of course. Then they say, well, we need a higher authority than just national governments, because they're always arguing, so then they end up getting a parliament, etc. And so what happened to Europe is to happen to America, Canada, Mexico, in fact the whole of Latin America. And this article here touches on it. It says NAFTA on steroids, North American Free Trade Agreement. The Trans-Pacific Partnership and Global Neoliberalism is called here. And it goes into a world without democracy, ruled by a technocratic elite serving the interests of US and global capital, protecting investor rights against national laws and regulations, is now being created in secret negotiations over free trade treaties, one of which, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, may be sewn up this fall. And it says, can popular will stop it? Well, whose will? I don't know who. Well, they're always firing at will. They always tell you in the military to fire at will. You notice that too? Because there is no will at all. It says, for 4 decades now, we have seen corporate-led neoliberal globalization transforming nation-states into globalized states that serve the interests of transnational capital above the interests of national populations. Well, that's what the Royal Institute for International Affairs said they'd do 100 years ago. They create these massive trading blocks, merge all their laws together under, and they get a super parliament running the whole thing. And even that super parliament would be eventually under a global parliament. That was the idea. This is a very old idea, run by the same people, by the way, who already owned the world 200, 300 years ago. But since this tendency has been strong in states both of the global north and the global south, everywhere sovereignty is being compromised. The ideal political system most suited for such globalized states is polyarchy, since it legitimates relatively autonomous elite rule. And that's what we have to do, is elite rule. Experts, you see. You always hear that term experts and you jump to, oh, they know what they're talking about, he's an expert. They often don't have to, even in articles, have to name the experts. Just say the word experts, and people listen. That's how you're trained. Bertrand Russell says we'll train them to believe in nothing but experts. They'll even doubt their own thoughts. You want an expert opinion on everything, right? And it never dawns on you it can be used for political purposes. It says, however, even such a managed democracy, there are moments where elites can be made accountable to national populations through the struggles of social movements. And then they're going about the Occupy Wall Street was the beginning of such a social movement. But we know that who's behind that too. Because George Soros is behind all of that as well. And this article goes into Milton Fisk and what he talked about in The State and Justice, and an essay in political theory. In the class-divided societies of capitalist countries, the function of the state is to maintain the social order. Well, it's the same in communist countries as well. It says this means that the political elite promotes the interests of the economically dominant class. And it's the same in communist countries as well. Because the dominant ones in the communist countries like the Soviet Union were awfully stinking rich folks. Many of them came in fact, from other countries to take it over. And then when they collapsed, supposedly the Soviet system, when it was time to do so, they all fled out with billions of American dollars with them. That was in the papers at the time. But I'll put this article up tonight that talks about, under the guise of neoliberalism, as they call it today, the agenda. There's many terms for the same agenda, and of course liberalism sounds better, because you've all been trained that conservative is bad. But it's all a con game. Conserve and be liberal. Always think of splashing sauce on your French fries or something. The Conservatives don't want a lot to go on it, and liberals sounds like they'll splash it all over the place. It's all a con game, folks. Left and right. Always has been. The big boys that ran the world have no intention of giving anyone democracy. They all believed that they themselves, as the experts, should rule the world a long, long time ago. And they had no intention of giving you a say in the matter. I'll put this up tonight too. And also too, just to show you how everything, when they brought the computer and privacy and all the rest of it, oh, your personal computer. Of course, it was everybody else, as you said. You were paying for it, because you're an idiot, you see. And that's why the marketers gave it a name like personal computer. It's yours. Then a little questions when you set the thing up about privacy and your privacy and passwords and all that nonsense, eh? Then you find out since 95 at least, they've had backdoors in all of the computers so that all the government agencies can get in. And they have been going in since then, at least since then. But you will fall for everything. That's why they use propaganda, which turns into public relations. That's the new term for propagandists. But anyway, everybody's got access to it, and all the private organizations too, like the RSPCA. The RSPCA says drills into cops' databases, harvests private info. The Animal Charity, another philanthropy, there's a philanthropist again running the world. Private organization. It says it gets a pause on police data, and nobody appears to be watching. Oh, they're watching, all right. They don't care. But it says British Animal Welfare Charity, the RSPCA, enjoys unique access to confidential information on the police national computer, the extent of which has not been disclosed before. Now, I know for a fact, because I spoke about 8 years to a guy who popped in to see someone who was just retiring from the Canadian government. And what they do with these early retirees is they get lots of cash to go into communities and start little organizations up. And this person was involved in animal welfare. And this guy who was telling me this was also a part-time guy into the animal control officer for his area. He had many other little jobs. And he loves to talk. So he talked his head off, and this woman asked him every question under the sun, including who had dogs and cats and who didn't. And he was getting all the gossip. And this is what these folks do, folks. They get all the gossip on everybody in the area, and it's put into central databases, and it goes to the feds. And every country under the so-called British Commonwealth system has been the same for years. So this is not a unique story here at all. But getting back to the story, civilians who claim to work for the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals can access criminal records and carry out vehicle checks by making requests to the Association of Chief Police Officers Criminal Records Office, ACRO, which charges the charity for the information. Now, the Association of Chief Police Officers is also a private organization. And they're actually chartered with the United Nations, actually, the UN. They have their own publications that are sent to them from the UN, in fact. They even have their own TV station for themselves. And they run your cop stations across the world. It's awfully different from the way that you think things really are, isn't it? It says it's an unusual arrangement because the RSPCA can gain access to an individual's full criminal history, from warnings and reprimands to convictions. Can you imagine they can even get reprimands, folks? Probably even from your school. It can get details of upcoming prosecutions and other information as deemed relevant by ACRO. Police information may be only disclosed to non-statutory bodies under strict criteria. Each individual disclosure must be proportionate and necessary for the purpose for which it's being shared. Blanket disclosures are not legal. The RSPCA is widely believed to have special powers to prosecute individuals, but actually, in fact, it has none. It's a private organization, folks. It has none, and instead relies solely on common law rights. It does, however, have a large financial war chest to take out private prosecutions. Private war chest again. Although the number of animal cruelty investigations has fallen in recent years, the charity has arguably used these resources much more aggressively, and it's claimed the taxpayer has footed the RSPCA's court prosecution legal bills. So here's again the taxpayer, as always, funding a private organization's bills. And believe you me, the guys at the top, the men and women at the top of this organization, the big legal department, they're getting fantastic salaries, folks. Anything that's anything to do with government acceptance gets fantastic salaries. They give themselves whatever they want, actually. Whatever they want. Life is a racket. The system is a racket. It's all a big con. The important part is a technique that's used to get the majority of the public to believe that the con is all real. And then you get screwed forever and ever and ever. Amen. Quite simple. Remember what I mentioned too about propaganda when it comes to health. Anything to do with health. Because behind health is big pharma and big business. and with policing, you see, because it's a system, whoever the system happens to be. So they give you lots of fiction to soak up, to do with cops just can't sleep at night having to get this bad guy. Or the pharma guys are trying to find the cure or a vaccine for something. It's all propaganda, folks. And you're raised with it. Back after this. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt. We're cutting through the matrix and talking about the system as it really is. And you have to question all of it, in fact. Everything you take for granted should be questioned. If you don't want to be meat on the table, or steak on the table, and be subburdened by choice and consent. But most folk do, actually. They actually accept slavery in a form. And there's many forms of slavery, folks. What's the difference? What's the difference between, say, the mafia going around parts of a city and to the storekeepers and demanding money from them, or something happens to them, they lose their business or whatever, and the big boys using your taxes to give to private corporations, or you lose your home and everything else and end up in prison or whatever? What's the difference, folks? You see, you can put everything down to extortion. Just use extortion for all of it, because that's what it is. But anyway, here's an article here on Haiti. Now, Haiti has always really had forces against them, because they were the first slavery people, basically, who were transplanted there as slaves, to rebel and take over. And believe you me, the elite never forget anything down through history. But here's an article that says that, this is an article from Global Research that tends to do the communist sides of things, because you always have a spin in one way or another. But it's not a bad article. It says the international community is so screwed up they're letting Haitians run Haiti. Luigi R. Einaudi, the U.S. career diplomat, member of the Council on Foreign Relations and former Assistant Secretary General at the Organization of American States, said, you see, back in 2004. So it says, Haitian author and human rights attorney Ezili Danto heard Luigi R. Einaudi make this shocking comment in 2004 as Haiti was about to celebrate its 200 years of independence with its first democratically elected president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide. Apart from his efforts to raise the minimum wage and other social measures for the majority of Haitians living in extreme poverty, Aristide planned to nationalize his country's resources, a move which meant more money for Haitians and less for the multinational corporations. 1 month later, in the name of the international community, and that's what's used for all the wars now, the international community have spoken. You know, what is this international community? Is it a different planet? Is it a UFO or something? You know? Anyway, it says Aristide was overthrown a month later in a coup d'etat orchestrated by the US, France, and Canada. And it says, today the international community is running Haiti again, colonial style. As you can easily tell by comparing the slow construction of shelters and basic infrastructure for the Haitian majority with the rapid rise of luxury hotels for foreigners, sometimes with the help of aid funds, which we're told were going to provide Haitians with basic necessities. I don't know if people remember when the earthquake hit and all the rest of it too, the last time, that I think it was Bill Clinton. People were throwing money out there, as always do, and people were pretty decent and throw the cash out, and up pops Bill Clinton at the end of it, and I think it was Bush Senior, who were then put in charge of the money, which made everybody feel much better, I'm sure, you know. And of course that's the last they saw of the money, because the folks still don't have wells or anything else dug for them, but they've got all these massive hotels for all the foreign people coming in, who work for top international corporations. Everything's a con. Everything's a con. Anyway, it says, one can easily tell by comparing the construction, the shelters with the big, hotels for foreigners and so on. Most of the aid money went to donor countries' businesses, government agencies and non-governmental organisations as usual. There's been many articles done on non-governmental organisations that went in there. No one was asking you, if you went in as an NGO, how many staff you had, what you had with you to help or anything else. They were just getting dished out the big, massive grants. People make their living of going from one NGO and creating them to another. They make a fantastic amount of money. The good con men do, you know. Anyway, it's a well-known capitalist scheme aimed at developing markets in the global south for businesses from the north. Of course, this aid will benefit Haitians, it says, but only the very few elite ones, those in power and the rich corporate elite. Haitians open for business, and deluxe hotels will be welcoming businessmen so they can set up their sweatshops in a cool and luxurious environment. Well, that's the way the world goes. The whole world's like that. Why just pick Haiti, you know? The US is to go down the tubes as well, so is Canada, Australia, New Zealand, a whole bunch of countries that are slated to go down the tubes. We've done our job, we've conquered the world for our bosses, and it's time to stagnate and go down the way, you see. And as you're going down too, you've got all the wonderful things to do with the taxations. It's getting stepped up all the time, as you well know. Everyone knows this. Every country's getting the same thing. And I've got an article here about small businesses in the States getting whacked right now because the IRS is stepping up its demand for cash. And then another one too, to do with the fact that they might just come after you if you're behind in your taxes. They might come after you through your driving license. So since New York is also one of the states in the US, New York is known as an aggressive state when it comes to tax collection. It's about to get tougher still, it says. It's creating a driver's license suspension program aimed at those who owe at least $10,000 in back taxes and who've exhausted all appeals. This is after getting robbed and plundered by the banks in 2008. And the banks all got bailed out by guess who? The taxpayers, who are all now broke. But it says 16,000 tax scofflaws are put in notice. This is an announcement from the government. Andrew Cuomo warned earlier this month, license suspension could be a very effective way to get the laggards to pony up. So if you can't pay your extortion money, you simply can't travel. It'll be a crime for you to travel, because you're on the list now. But it says people rely on their driver's license not only to drive to work, but as a form of identification for travel and to prove residency and even to buy a drink, it says. Then it says, is it really fair? How much of life is fair, folks? There's a system here. And it's not equal. It's never ever been equal. It never intends to become equal in any way at all. And what's equality anyway when it comes to the top countries? I mean, if you get charged with a crime, you get on with it if you can afford the best lawyers. If you can't, you're given a government-paid one who isn't going to try very hard. They've got 1,000 other little cases to do, and they don't really give a damn. There's no incentive for them to get you off. Anyway, it says it is if you really owe the money. And at the time for disputing the charge is over, says David Brunori, deputy publisher of Tax Analysis. Holding your feet to the fire is not necessarily crazy, it says. As a self-described libertarian, Brunori is no fan of government, but explains his position this way: getting a license is a privilege. See, you're back to this Queen of England. The Queen was with the first idea of the privileges. You have no rights, you've got privileges. You pay for privileges, folks. It's called licensing and so on. A license is the right once you pay the money. Just the payment of the money makes it legal for you to do things that would be otherwise illegal to do. This is called democracy and freedom. It's amazing to me how money seems to fix everything, isn't it? And the big massive con with global warming and CO2 and the big bankers have already set up their banks to funnel the cash through. And the governments are rubbing their hands with glee too for all their massive wage increases they'll give themselves and all the rest of it from this con. But money's going to fix everything. Global warming too. The climate, everything. Money. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing, folks, eh? money was going to bring democracy to the entire Middle East. And now it's been bombed back to the Stone Age. And they're still doing it. They haven't finished yet. And folks still go and vote because they've been conditioned, as Cass Sunstein would say, to go back to their default position on voting at the vote time, you see. Because daddy's always been this, or daddy's been that, one or the other. Left or right. Getting back to what Jefferson said. When you see the same agenda continue between changes in the Congress, know then that you're under tyranny. From Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, is good night to me, your God or your gods go with you.